Welcome, everyone, to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host, and with me for Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim is my friend and yours, Alex Kane.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me back.
I have to say, it is such a joy to have an excuse to say, Book of Boba Fett is like this Outer Rim time that we've kind of classified as these like fairy tale / westerns that are happening in the Outer Rim. And just to be like, hey, Alex, you want to do this with me has been like just so good to say, hey, let's do it. But we will be covering the Book of Boba Fett, the entire first season series. Do we know what it's going to be?
I don't know. It could be a Loki situation. Maybe.
I thought the rumors about Loki being more than one season were out for like a really long time or something. And then people were surprised that there was more than one season. I was like,
yeah,
maybe I'm in different Twitter than everyone else.
Yeah, I was surprised, but I didn't follow Loki that much until it came out. And I was like, holy shit, this is really great, but
yeah, exactly. So just to let you know, our Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim series covers sort of all of these shows that are happening around this period of time. So that's Mandalorian and Boba Fett, and there's a few others that have been announced that may or may not happen. So we will see as we get to them. But in particular, you were incredibly interested in this series. So maybe we'll get into this
sure.
a little bit before we get into the first episode, Chapter 1, Stranger in a Strange Land. I had zero expectations because I gotta say, I'm not a huge follower of Rodriguez. I've seen Spy Kids. I've seen Four Rooms. And that's about it. So that's my experience with him. But you were much more excited. So that's why I was super excited to bring you along on this journey.
Yeah, well, so I sort of grew up with knowing him as the guy who did From Dusk Till Dawn and Desperado, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, and then like The Faculty, stuff like that. So I sort of always thought of him as this like guy who does these, or Planet Terror that he did with Tarantino.
Yeah.
These really sort of far out Texas westerns with like horror movie monsters in the mix, and really like over the top kind of gags and just set pieces and stuff. He's got a very distinctive style, and I think the people who appreciate a certain kind of show offiness in the director really have fun with him. And I think Spy Kids probably does the same thing. I've seen just little clips of Spy Kids and stuff, and it seems like a very similar type of deal with the spy glasses that zoom in, over the eye.
It's over the top and campy and sort of like a live action Inspector Gadget in some ways, like
yes. Mm-hmm.
Cartoony in real life. But he also like really loved themes like family and love, and
yes,
really explored those sorts of things in Spy Kids.
He is like a big family man. Like he has kids that he keeps journals about his kids and his favorite memories of vacations and stuff. And I think he's one of like 7 siblings or something like that. So
wow, big family.
Yeah. He is kind of, you mentioned family, and like that is kind of the thing that he talks about in interviews and whatnot. So, yeah, when I first saw his name announced in the Mando season 2 lineup, I was like, wow, that's an odd choice for Star Wars. Don't know how that's going to go. And then his episode was like probably my favorite one in season 2, or maybe the second favorite. Rick's was really good at the end too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Rick Famuyiwa, just making nothing but amazing Star Wars.
Yeah.
Since he's started directing and writing for Star Wars.
Yeah, he's consistently great, and he like wrote and directed that really great penultimate episode. So yeah, would love to see more from
Bryce
him.
Dallas Howard, who's going to be a director for this season as well.
Yeah.
So the direction of the episodes is actually going to be split out among 6 directors. We're going to get one from John. We're going to get one from Dave. Bryce Dallas Howard. Let me just check the other ones. We're getting Steph Green and Kevin Tancharion.
Huh.
Yeah. Steph Green is most well known for Watchmen and The Americans. And Kevin himself has directed Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. before, and as well the show Fame. I don't know if you remember that one where they were like producing a musical.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. And we also directed Mortal Kombat Rebirth.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's going to be more voices again in this one that are new and not the standard, but also this is also coming from Jon Favreau's view of Boba Fett. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. He wrote the first episode. He's executive producing it. This was always his dream. He always wanted to do a Boba Fett show. So it's going to be heavily influenced from like his perspective of Mandalorians and what he loves and about Boba Fett himself.
Yeah. I would anticipate, like, even though it's kind of Rodriguez's like signature style so far, like a lot of the ideas are going to come from Favreau and probably Filoni as well.
Yeah. As they sort of like blend into stuff. And that is why my bar for this show pre this episode was like, you know, just show me what you're going to show me. I have no expectations. I can't expect anything because in truth, like I've been going through a lot of like internal soul searching about Star Wars, especially how it feels like some of the ideas around Star Wars are very stuck in the same. And I haven't quite figured all of that out yet in my own brain. And I'm sure some of my listeners as well are in a similar place. And if they're coming along for this ride, thank you so much. That's amazing that you're willing to come along for the Book of Boba Fett when I myself wasn't even sure about it to begin with. But as we start to dig into this first episode, I think that there's some really interesting things happening. So, of course, this will be a full spoiler deep dive into the episode. And if you haven't watched it, turn back now. Go watch the episode and then come back. All right. Do you want to give us our summary, Alex?
Yeah. Okay. Two stories are told in parallel, exploring Fett's past through flashbacks, as well as his new reign as daimyo on Tatooine in the palace that once belonged to Jabba the Hutt. The episode opens with familiar shots of Jabba's old palace outside Mos Espa. We see an empty throne and finally Boba in a bactopod. He dreams of the stormy oceans on Kamino, his homeworld, and of his father's death years earlier on Geonosis. Then we find him deep in the belly of the Sarlacc on Tatooine, where we saw him devoured in 1983's Return of the Jedi. He searches the darkness for some means of salvation, finding only a dead Imperial stormtrooper whose armor has begun dissolving inside the beast. Boba unplugs the suit's emergency air supply and steals a few gasps of oxygen from the tubing. With his strength back for a moment, he punches a hole through the creature's stomach lining and puts his flamethrower to use. He collapses in the sand outside the pit, and come nightfall, the local Jawas strip him of his Mandalorian armor. He looks pale, powdery, covered in fluids, like a newborn. The next day, he's discovered by a band of Tusken Raiders. He fights one of them and loses. Wake up, boss, says Fennec Shand. The dreams are back, he tells her. So we're back in the present day, around 5 or 6 years later, and various leaders from across Tatooine come to pay tribute and offer a show of respect, except the mayor, who sends his major domo to ask for money instead. Out in the streets, Boba and Fennec are ambushed by half a dozen masked assassins brandishing red-orange energy shields. With plenty of help from their new Gamorrean guards, they take down 4 of their attackers, and the remaining 2 begin to flee. Fennec pursues them onto the rooftops. Alive, Boba insists. Shand kicks one of them off a roof, but manages to take the other prisoner. Back at the palace in the Bacta tank, Boba dreams once again of his time in the Tusken camp. He and a Rodian dig for water-filled bulbs in the desert for their captors. Boba tries to come up with a plan of escape, but the Rodian finds a scaly claw buried in the sand and disturbs a large 6-limbed monster like something out of a Ray Harryhausen movie. It crushes the Rodian and prepares to do the same to Fett, but the Tusken intervenes, giving Boba a chance to make his move. Using the long chain around his ankle, he strangles the creature to death, and the young Tusken carries its head back to camp, yelling excitedly in a language neither Boba nor we yet understand about how the Mandalorian felled the beast. The Tusken chief hands Fett a bulb of water as a show of respect, and the bounty hunter takes a luxuriant and much-needed drink.
Yep. All right, Alex, how did you feel about this episode?
I enjoyed it. It was an easy sell for me. I'm kind of a sucker for like direct tie-ins to like Return of the Jedi specifically. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But I'm very pro Jabba's palace and Act 1 of Return of the Jedi. I think it's fun. I think it has that cantina feel from the original Star Wars.
Yep.
It's sort of
Mos Espa also has a lot of prequel significance.
Very George. It's where all the pod race stuff happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I expected more of like a clincher at the end. Like they like to do the big tease of Boba Fett's return that they did in Mando season 2, or, Baby Yoda, which was like a huge revelation at the time, Grogu. We didn't really get that. We just sort of get this like menacing air of mystery with Sanctuary and the Night Wind assassins, and the sense
we're left with both storylines in a way, like the past and then the near present.
Yeah. What are the Tuskens gonna like? What's the significance of them to the story? Obviously, it's going to be an enormous significance, but where are they going with that? I don't know. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Rewatching it, I was eager to rewatch it, and I'm excited to watch it like a third and fourth time. I'm a sucker for Matt Berry. I'm a sucker for the droid that he plays because I used to play with that.
Like I loved Flashdance.
Yeah, it had all these just fun little, Star Wars is like this tapestry with like all this texture to it, and like the original trilogy, you can just talk about it endlessly, and the trivia and the sort of, there's just like all this George in it. And this episode had that feel. Like it didn't feel like a throwaway thing that they threw up on Disney Plus. It didn't feel cheap and threadbare to me. It felt like it had a lot of love in it.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I mean, again, expectations were at 0 when I walked in. I was like, I have 0 expectations, and I watched it, and I was not expecting to have deep emotional resonance kind of right off the bat with Boba Fett, with this character that, I mean, many people, rightly so, just sort of associate as this cold killing machine, until the prequels humanized him by making him a little boy. Right? A little boy with a father who lost his father. That just absolutely humanizes anyone. And, this is all to the concept that everybody in the galaxy far, far away, and ours, starts out as a baby, right? They don't come from a place of evil. They come from a place of innocence. And we're quickly reminded in Show Don't Tell Us about that. And that's so interesting that they flash back instantly to the prequels, and that must be the love of, of course, Dave of the prequels, probably Robert Rodriguez himself, as well as John, who's learned, to love the prequels and what they represent probably through Dave. And if that's what we have gotten to with the storytelling team up of Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, that's amazing. Knowing where John started from not necessarily liking the prequels all that much. Perhaps several deep conversations have happened in the meantime. It's an exploration of a character that I feel absolutely needs to happen, and people deserve characters that they love that have layers to them. And there's a lot going on in this show. And even right off the bat, I was like, there's something really interesting and psychological and almost mythological happening with how they're telling the story. I got the same feeling when I watched Mando. John understands the hero's journey, at least the structure of it. So he definitely sees and is able to put Boba on the path and say, this is where Boba's at, like spiritually or whatever, and spiritually, psychologically, and we're exploring this, get ready. But he also doesn't say like it's all just going to be flashbang. It's not that. This is a period in his life, and I think that the first episode setting it up in this particular way says that. And we're going to go into that with like some of the genre inspirations, some of the symbology and symbolism, that the semiotics that have happened in this episode, as well as kind of just how it goes about it. I think we'll get there. I hope. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it on being able to rewatch it as well. I think it does a lot to widen the character immediately in the eyes of the audience, and that can only be a good thing. No one is just gray. No one is just black. No one is just white from a moralistic perspective. And we're getting such an interesting look at Boba Fett in his fullness of character.
I was very pleasantly surprised by how quickly we were thrown into Camino and Geonosis. Like that showed up really early, and yeah, it was nice to see as an Attack of the Clones fan who, you know, a lot of creators probably don't sign up so they can, you know,
be like, yeah, we're gonna base this in Attack of the Clones as far as where the spiritual root of this character is. Well, that only makes sense, right? It doesn't make sense to put it anywhere else for who this character is. I also am a Return of the Jedi fan as well. It is like the first Star Wars that I grew up with. And so seeing him back, the Sarlacc pit, I never assumed Boba survived. He didn't mean that much to me. So I just, you know, but like literally word for word, this is what people have said would happen. He would just like bust out of the sand like some sort of like superhero and come. But it was much harder on him than we were maybe led to believe. Nobody was surprised at his like escape from the Sarlacc pit, I think, except for people that maybe had him pegged as some sort of grandiose god. Yep. As far as genre and inspirations, the things that I caught specifically were there's a lot of dances with wolves because of the tribe and the sand people aspects, and like him being captured and being brought and like, you know, in a way brought into this society even as somebody with lesser power within the sand people. There's a lot of Dune. It just felt very Dune-y with the flashbacks, especially the seeking of water, which has some symbolic meaning in and of itself. Specifically, the title of the episode, Stranger in a Strange Land, is most commonly associated with Robert Heinlein's novel, Stranger in a Strange Land, which has a fair amount of similarities with the water aspects, but that's kind of about it. There is also the fact that Heinlein actually took that from Exodus 2:22. I'll be getting into that a little bit more when we get into the symbology, but specifically it's about Moses and how Moses, when he was sort of between when he, you know, defies the slave master in Egypt and runs away from being a prince of Egypt and hangs out with the sheep herders in the desert, he gets married. He has a kid. He's kind of on a break from himself. He's like in this in-between phase. So Exodus is, of course, all about Moses and the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. Moses himself is kind of in this weird place where he is denying both who he was as a servant of Egypt and who he is truthfully, which is a child of Israel. And he is trying to figure himself out. And fundamentally, that's where we find both Moses and Boba Fett, which is fascinating. There was also some musical inspiration that I noticed with Ludwig Göransson's and Joseph Shirley's score. It felt a lot like Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, especially with all of the male chorus, as well as just felt like Mando, like the Mandalorian Western feel to the score, but it was unique and beautiful on its own. I also liked the sort of mariachi version of the Cantina theme.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was good. It made me think maybe Rodriguez is the one that's playing the guitar in the Sanctuary.
It's very possible. Very possible. Yeah, I had the same thought.
All right, let's go into the parallel stories that are being told at the same time. So we have, first and foremost, we have like this rebirth of Boba Fett.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which it's interesting you mentioned Moses. Like the name Moses means to lift out of water or something like that, or like
yes,
just to lift out. And so he's been lifted out of the water in the sense of Camino, but also out of the belly of the Sarlacc, and he's kind of covered in fluid. So it's kind of like applies to both of the parallel stories. The Moses connection's kind of fun. You know, right away, like as soon as you see Jabba's palace and sort of get past the empty throne, you're immediately thrust into like dreams. Like you're in a dream realm in a lot of this, you know, which is I think that's a pretty unique thing for Star Wars. Like Revenge of the Sith was probably the first time we really, really saw that. A little bit in Attack of the Clones, but
and like from a dream perspective or flashback, it's almost unheard of until Mandalorian. Like we have a little bit of flashback in The Last Jedi, but then Mandalorian is the first time we've actually seen flashbacks.
Yeah, when George did it, it was like a nightmarish vision of the future, what might happen, kind of like Luke's vision in Empire Strikes Back, but like here, as in Mandalorian, it's like the demons of the past haunting them. You know, their shadow and all that.
And to me, there's like a couple of things that are really interesting. So he dreams of his birthplace, you know, his life, the water, coming out of the water, that he is born from this water place. And he dreams of the death of his father, which is, you know, from a Jungian psychology perspective, when your ego and who you are solidifies. Why dream of both birth and ego is because he's actually in ego death right now, which is that he is reinventing himself based on a rebirth that has happened through the Sarlacc pit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, literally people are like, wait a second, did he like change when he went into the Sarlacc pit? Yes, that is the point. He died spiritually, you know, personality wise inside of the Sarlacc pit. He faced a skeleton-like creature, a skeleton stormtrooper inside of the Sarlacc pit, and burst forth almost looking exactly like a newborn baby.
Yeah, that stormtrooper is so interesting that he's like, all he has to kind of aid him is the Empire, when he's a clone of his father, and his father was used as the template for all the clones, which then became the Empire and then sort of were usurped by the stormtroopers. And then, you know, he has like all this baggage of the Empire is like his demons. Like it's just all kind of, you know, the Empire was like literally built on his father's DNA, so to speak, right? I mean,
yeah, like he is the fundamental power of the Empire, or what it was able to do.
Yeah, it's sort of like that notion that like ancient, like almighty empires were built on the backs of like the slaves who built, you know, the great monuments and stuff. It, like Jango is kind of that figure in the clone to stormtrooper kind of mythos.
Yeah, and he is, and Boba being like the kind of true clone of Jango is just a representation of Jango as well. And he has inherited all of this generational shadow from Jango, from the clones, from the Empire. And what does he do with that? he becomes kind of the hired gun of the Empire. He works with them so much. He makes money off of the dark and destruction of the Empire, even though the Empire, as it is now, used his sort of life force to control the universe or the galaxy.
Yeah.
Really deep stuff. Really cool stuff.
Like both him and his father sort of sold their souls to the Empire to just pay the bills, so to speak, to get by and survive. And I don't know.
He inherited all of that generational trauma from his dad directly because he kept it up. He kept up that trauma and that choice to still help the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the Empire subjugates not only his people, the clones, destroys his home planet, Kamino, who he, where he grew up until he was around, 10? And then also, enslaved / potentially destroyed Mandalore. So much stuff going on with our character of Boba Fett, which is a lot deeper than, say, maybe we were given in 1983 about the character, or 80 and 77. We get this introduction where he's captured by the Sand People. They take him back to their village, and him and the Rodian, they're not trusted, but they're kind of in this you can't escape kind of purgatory of pain in so many ways. He's tied to a pole, he's threatened by a watchdog, that he doesn't know what's going to happen to him. He's suffering from the heat of the sun and the cold of the night. And even when he tries to escape, there is no escape. There's only pain and punishment. And that's where we kind of leave that first parallel story, and bring it back to where he is in formerly Jabba's palace, now Boba's palace, right? We got to call it correctly. But it doesn't feel like Boba's palace. He hasn't really made it his own, except for he has a throne with his name on it, which is interesting. And he demands respect. He demands respect and tribute.
Yeah. I found it interesting that the Rodian sold him out and was voiced by Sam Witwer, who's primarily is famous for voicing Darth Maul and Palpatine at various cases. So it's almost this idea that no matter where he goes. Yeah. No matter where he goes, those damn Sith and their empires, kind of funny.
Yeah. And he was a red and yellow Rodian too.
Yes, yeah.
Which is interesting.
A Sith-like in a way.
Yeah. Yep. So we have Boba awaken, and he has this kind of interesting dynamic with Fennec, who calls him boss, but they definitely seem to have a bigger character relationship developed, because I don't know about you, but I don't typically share my dreams with my coworkers.
Yeah. There's an intimacy there. They're hiding it from the people coming in and out of the palace, and they're kind of hiding it from us and the audience, but there's clearly an intimacy there that's either, besties or, something else. But
they married.
They're married. Yeah.
It's kind of our joke, Alex and I, that we're oh my gosh, they really are kind of that kind of couple that is colleagues with benefits, sort of. I know that in one of the interviews they described them as the dynamic that was in Remington Steele. So that makes me think Fennec has something else going on. She's maybe more than what she seems. But also there's this chemistry and attraction between the two of them where they work together. And my hope is that by the end of the season, we will learn kind of what their relationship truthfully is. Is it that she feels like she owes him her life, or, what exactly is? And he for sure gives her foot rubs when his back is not hurting.
Yes.
we get sort of all of the examples of the tributes happening, which, you know, are fun. Like, you know, like the Wookiee pelt and the case of coins. The
two
Gamorreans. Yeah. And of course, this is all narrated sort of in a C-3PO sort of way with Matt Berry, this droid, who we originally saw in Return of the Jedi, burning the feet of the Gonk droid. That scene of like the Gonk droid like screaming in pain is like burned into my memory. I can like never forget it because it's used to horrify R2-D2 as an example. And so 8D8, which is the droid, is just like perfectly voiced as Matt Berry, who is Laszlo from What We Do in the Shadows. Oh my gosh, I died having him on screen.
Yeah, he was a good fit. Like I didn't like I'm a big fan of Laszlo, and the first time I watched the episode, I didn't realize it was him until I saw the end credits. So it didn't take me out like it did some people. Like, whoa, wait, but it's definitely a contrast from Return of the Jedi, where he's just kind of an expressionless, silent, you know, torture master. Like just this evil, cold, like almost like an enchanted skeleton in a dungeon or something.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. He does a really good job of mentioning how the tortured screams would help invoke fear amongst everyone else. And sort of that ties very classically back to him being like a torture droid, I guess, in old Jabba's palace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very
it's kind of funny that like the skeleton only remains. Like this skeleton-like droid is the only thing that kind of remains with the Gamorreans. What did you think of how Boba treated everybody? Like he didn't like kill that major domo who was like, actually, I'm here for tribute from you.
I mean, he's projecting strength. He wants to be feared a little bit. But he's kind of like Dalton in Roadhouse, Patrick Swayze's character in Roadhouse, like this idea, you know, Patrick Swayze's character can rip your throat out if he wants to, but his mantra is be nice. Like if somebody gets in your face and insults your mother, like you be nice and hope that they're nice back. And that's a very kind of like, I don't know, Zen Patrick Swayze, almost Jedi-like way to be. And so I like that, you know, he pretends that he's the Boba Fett that like fans think that they know and remember from the comic books, you know, the way like Charles Soule writes him and stuff. Like, yeah, he is like a badass bounty hunter with that same sort of edge that he had in the holiday special cartoon, you know.
I think it's also important to note that he is old and also on death's door. Like we see that multiple times. Like nobody's really acknowledging that. Like he literally is only living because he spends his sleeping hours in a Bacta tank, which is not for like light use.
Yeah, there's almost like like a vampire element to that, right? Like sleeping.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, I mean, that's a very Star Wars thing, like with Palpatine and
Count Dooku being directly inspired by Dracula. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And like there's a limit to your power, right? Like you can't necessarily just go out and be that sort of badass. You also have to like, yeah. And also like you can't make business deals if everybody only fears you, right? You can't necessarily like people. I think Boba, I hope, realizes, and maybe this is because he has experienced some sort of respect with the people that have been around him in the Mandalorian seasons, in Mandalorian season 2 especially, like maybe he is changed by that experience as well.
Yeah.
Like working together with others. It's an interesting thing to think through.
Yeah, if Boba Fett and Fennec Shand invited me to like come to their Super Bowl party, I would say yes, but Bib Fortuna and Jabba the Hutt, I would decline. You know, it's a very kind of it's a big shift, but he's still projecting power. He still wants to be the daimyo and the crime lord in the sector, but I don't know. He's very cool and likable about it. There's a bit of theater going on, right? Where like Snoke's whole thing was kind of like Wizard of Oz. Like Boba has like an element of that where he says like, I'll ask for your loyalty and if I spare your life, will you be loyal to me? Like if they said no, is he going to just like cut their throats right there? Like, I don't get the feeling that he would, based on what we've seen, but,
I also don't get the feeling like he's just going to allow people to kill him. Like he just won't, right? Like that's when he'll step in and be like, no, this is enough of that. You know? Yeah. I also feel like, there's an element of we don't know exactly why he is trying to be this guy, right? Why?
Yeah, the teaser where he took the throne, like that was very, we have no idea like what the motivation is here, what Fennec's agenda is. And to me, that's what's exciting. Like that's what's propelling the show in a way. Mm-hmm. People are like, what's the point of the show? Why should we care? And to me, that's kind of the answer is just that, what is it about Tatooine? Like what unfinished business does he have there of all places, instead of going to Camino and I don't know, living on a boat on Camino, he decided to come to Tatooine. So what is it about this biblical desert that, he still has some mission that he needs to achieve?
We know what's under the surface as far as what he's still needing to do. He's reinventing himself through this like ego death, through this like who I am as a new person who has been reborn and experienced things directly after that death, where I believe what we will see and what we saw in the first episode is accepted into the Sand People as a member of them. Or lived with them for a period of time, and they gave him gifts associated with living with them. I believe that we will see that. I also think that, Fennec joining with him was also a quite a significant thing for him, which I hope we will also see as well. But that doesn't tell us why, like, because he doesn't seek power necessarily. He's just trying to exist, I think. And it's not like he's ever, like, he certainly has the ability to take over and be a crime lord, but the why he wants to do that, I hope that they explore. And I hope that it's quite an interesting reason that he's sort of going through all of this bother, which he never was interested in before. Because truthfully, he's not even going about it in, like Fennec said, the most efficient way possible, given the circumstances, using fear. He's perfectly capable of doing that. So the reason that he needs people's loyalty out of respect rather than fear, it has to be a bigger thing than I just kind of want to control this spot.
Yeah. I keep going back to like Dune and Campbell and stuff in my head. And the thing that makes sense to me is that Tatooine throughout like the history of Star Wars has been about like exploitation and like doing all the horrible bad things you can to extract money from everybody. And I think that Campbell's, like, the hero's journey, would probably be about, harmony with nature, right? Returning to, and I feel like, sort of, Old West capitalism is kind of not quite that. And so I like the idea of the Tuskens being more involved with the story and this notion of water versus desert and this, the monster out in the desert. You go looking for water that's life-giving and you find this like giant,
you find death. Yeah.
Death instead. Yeah. I feel like that's the journey we're on, is how do we make Tatooine like a place of like harmony and
balance,
more Tusken like and less Bib Fortuna like.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm interested to see where they're going. I can tell you what symbology and like what they're laying the groundwork for, and we'll have to see if that plays out as they go. All right, let's go into the crime bosses and the sanctuary. I think those are two different things. So he's like, okay, not everybody showed up to my little meet and greet soiree, so I guess I got to go out there and remind people I exist. So he hoofs it over, not on a palanquin. He's not lifted amongst his slaves or his attendants. He brings himself on his own 2 good feet over to the sanctuary to meet Îyâxe Fwip, played by Jennifer Beal.
Yeah, it's kind of this like oasis in the desert, right? It's I saw somebody on Twitter say like, this looks like the only place on Tatooine that has central air conditioning. I don't remember who said that, but it was a very funny way to kind of drive home the point that this is kind of like that oasis in the desert with water and, sort of beautiful, semi bare bodies. And, it's very like
sex. There's sex in Star Wars again.
It's a little sexy and it's sort of like Mount Olympus vibes, I guess.
Yeah. Because everyone was kind of wearing semi togas, sort of that feel,
Mm-hmm.
Lots of jewelry, lots of makeup, lots of bare body parts and arms and stomachs showing, and it looked like a fun place to hang out.
Yeah, I was reminded of Goku in Dragon Ball Z. He's like making the passage through the the afterworld or heaven, or he's in the afterlife and he's making his passage across this road that leads him to whichever side. And along the way, he stops at this little like tea house type place. And there's all these like beautiful women fawning over him and giving him a bath and feeding him like this big feast. And then of course, like the woman in charge, like transforms into a giant snake and tries to eat him. So it's sort of like, it reminded me of that sort of like Edenic vibe of, maybe paradise is
temptation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I definitely got the impression that Madame Îyâxe, and every time that I hear Fwip, I think of Cool Whip. Cool. I don't know why, but Îyâxe, she's not all what she seems either, right? Like she's a sort of like the town, I don't know, like brothel owner in a way, right? Like that's what it looks like, right? It looks like that. It's in a Western sense of it. She's the town brothel owner, and those women were never to be messed with. And even though she's like, she acknowledges that Boba now owns this, like, oh, you're welcome whenever you want. You do own it now. Like, she's not one of those people to be played with or trifled with. Yeah. As long as he kind of stays out of her business, it would be interesting if like they were setting up some sort of semi-relationship dynamic where, she's fairly flirty with Boba and Fennec is there as well. That would be super interesting to me personally. We'll see as they explore their relationships, what kind of ally or whatever she becomes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do think that she will become a semi-ally in what they're doing. Because Boba's going to be the fair sheriff in town. Because like that's kind of the role that he's playing. He's like the new sheriff, even though it's like underworld. Because that's how things work in there. He is stepping in and he's like, well, I'll keep order in this location.
Yeah. Like the marshal, like Timothy Oliphant's character kind of.
Yes. Who, also wore the armor.
Yeah. It's a very Robert Rodriguez setting, that sanctuary, that whole idea of very colorful bar with mariachi guitars and beautiful women and stuff. Yeah, it's
gambling and just like there's plants, which also like makes it feel oasis-y in its in the sanctuary. And then immediately after they leave, they're attacked.
Mm-hmm.
These assassins, they're just there to take care of business. There isn't really much explanation about what they are, who they are, or anything like that. But they managed to take out Boba in a way because he is not fully healed from his experience from before and needs more time in his Bacta tank. It is interesting that he tells Fennec to capture them alive immediately after basically vaporizing somebody with an arm cannon missile.
Yeah, he did blast that one on the side of the building, didn't he? I forgot about that.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, yes, he wants to live. Like, it's to your Patrick Swayze parallel. Like, he's just not going to mess around if it's like in the moment, but he's going to try to treat people with respect. And he also needs information, right? Which is why he needs to know who's doing this, who's coming after him right now. He's a busy guy. He's got to get more tribute.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's probably the mayor.
Yeah.
Could be another person, another party that we just we haven't seen either. But I think it makes sense that it is the mayor. What do you think is going on with the mayor situation?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It's weird that like Bib Fortuna to me is not that terrifying a figure, and so I guess my hunch would be that when Jabba was killed, the power vacuum from that probably went elsewhere. Like maybe Bib got to hang out in the palace and play Jabba, LARP as a Hutt. But I would imagine what they're going for is that this mayor then was able to kind of aggressively take control of the action and the underworld crime and, all the, protections and like all the standard mob boss stuff that you do in a city of the size of Mos Espa. There's, I also thought the assassins had kind of like potentially a Crimson Dawn connection because I just had read a comic that, put Crimson Dawn and Boba together, but I don't know if that's how likely that is, but I kind of liked the idea that maybe there was a connection there given just kind of the red colors and
I really love their energy shields. I thought that was a really cool ad. Yeah. But immediately we know Boba is not doing well, has to go back to his Bacta pod, and we get part 2 of his sort of flashback to immediately after he was reborn via Sarlacc pit. And this time we get a Tusken boy and his pet dog. I think they're called mastiffs, those creatures, the dog-like creatures. And it looks like he's taking them out to like on a walk, almost like they're kind of like becoming pets too.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they go and see a very Lars Homestead-like location where they spot sort of this motorcycle / speeder gang that beats up the owner to steal water, it looks like. And then they leave and spray paint the building. And the boy seems semi-unconcerned and just wants a drink instead. And so tells them to dig, right? And this is the sort of idea, like there's more beneath the surface. There's life-giving things beneath the surface, but there's also death. And this is when we meet the sand beast that pops up as it's uncovered sort of scoop by scoop. And what did you think of this like reveal of this beast?
Oh, I loved it. I instantly thought of Clash of the Titans and the Kraken monster in the sea and also the scorpions, all that sort of stop motion animated stuff that I grew up watching as a kid. I felt like that was a very deliberate homage. And there's a lot of like random sort of Tatooine beasts in like the Star Wars video games from like the 90s and stuff. So it felt like that was all kind of a natural fit. I don't know, where that stuff comes from. I imagine it was like a vague notion that then somebody like Dave Filoni's like, oh yeah, I got this idea, you know, we can make it work. And then it works well. I think it fits. And it's like, oh, there's still mysteries on Tatooine. You know, it's not just crate dragons and Jawas, you know.
I did think for a hot minute it was going to be a crate dragon.
Yeah, I just assumed it was. And I was really thrilled when it was something new. Because, you know, I want this show to do new things like Mando did.
Yeah. I wanted to say we acknowledge Star Wars and what you think it means, but we want to take it and show you a different lens or a different perspective of what's going on with this galaxy far, far away. Especially since we're on Tatooine, and to me, it's like, oh, could we go somewhere else? But Tatooine has a very specific meaning from a spiritual journey perspective for the creators. And so, okay, we'll be on Tatooine if we must to experience these things.
Yeah. It's like,
so he takes out the sand beast and returns back to the village and it looks like the Rodian is killed in the midst
I think
of all
he's just
this.
crushed to death. Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't come back, but the head is removed. And he returns to the village, the boy carrying the head, which sort of reminds me of David versus Goliath and sort of that concept, but also this new guy has done a service or a boon for the village, because this could have been a thing that was tormenting the village, and so gets an offer of water from the chief.
Yes.
Oh, so good.
Also, he strangles the beast with the chain around his leg that's keeping him captive. So it's impossible. I immediately thought of Leia, you know, as the Hutt Slayer and strangling Jabba with her own chain, and just the kind of rich symbolism there. This idea that you know, the things that enrage you and harm you, I guess can give you strength in moments when you need it, you know.
It's a very it's a very concept of the dark side giving you power. You know, the dark side is powerful when you hate something or you're fighting against something. That in and of itself can break your chains. That's literally from the Sith code
yes.
about breaking chains. This hate is actually quite powerful. You just have to direct it in the right way, in the right, you know, in the right way to produce what you want. Yeah. So interesting. So all of this together, we get kind of these parallel stories. And what's interesting is they definitely use different filters and from a cinematography perspective to show the past is very blanched out, and he's in this dreamlike sequence, and he occasionally dreams of different things in amongst his sort of experiences with the Sand People. And in the modern time, or where we're currently at in Tatooine, where he's trying to be this crime lord and take over, it's a lot brighter from a filter perspective. From what we see, it has shows more colors. It's not as blanched out. There's a lot sort of saying that he himself has experienced this rebirth in the Sarlacc. We've talked about it a fair amount, but what's most important about this rebirth is that he is kind of in a desert spiritually right now anyways. He's trying to figure out who he is after this traumatic event has happened to him, and what this event meant about him, in that he couldn't recapture Han Solo. He couldn't be the kick-ass bounty hunter that he thought he was, and he was stuck in a Sarlacc pit. And it's about reinventing himself in general on Tatooine. I think that's really, really important to say.
Yeah. He has a really chapped skin on his face at one point, and then he sort of has to wander the desert in chains, and that sort of reminded me of both The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I rewatched season 5 of Better Call Saul this year as well. And this idea of like, I just basically narrowly survived, the sort of devil that was on my tail. And like, basically this idea that, all your sort of, your hands played, and now, basically you lose, and then you have to like sort of wander the inferno or whatever, and then hope you make it off the other side. And you can see Clint Eastwood do that in the Western, as well as Bob Odenkirk in Better Call Saul has the same thing, where it's like got to walk untold miles through a desert that should kill you, but
provides you with life and support, and you get through it. So this is in so many ways common in Westerns because they pull from the biblical like meaning of spiritual aridity, right? The desert, it is a refining period of time for you to work through and process all of the things that you're going through. So Jesus, 40 days and 40 nights in the desert. Moses wandered and his entire people wandered the desert, right? It's the same sort of concept. It's this idea that you need to hit rock bottom before you can actually rise up.
Yeah, rock bottom. That was the phrase I was looking for.
Oh, good.
good call. Yeah, and it just reinforces on like a visceral level, like the man is thirsty, like he needs a drink, he needs to get in that back to tank and think about the ocean that he came from.
Yeah. It's like we made a joke, you and I, in our chat before the show, that like when he first pulls himself out of the tank, healing process is suspended. It's like, and like the psychologist, he's laying on the couch, and the psychologist is like, and that's the end for today. We'll see you back next week. Like it just felt very like, and your psychology, your psychological trauma, we'll get into that next week when you have time to take your bath.
Yeah, like healing session interrupted or something like that. Also, I'm sure like the sound editor is like on Twitter, David Collins. Yeah, David Collins. Like I'm sure he would confirm or deny, but I swear that when he's in the back to tank, you hear a similar sound cue to Exegol, which is kind of like this abyss that
there's
feels.
a piano, like it's the creepy horror sound,
the shrill thing, exactly.
Yeah, it's actually it's done on violin.
Okay.
That kind of creepy like piano wire like squeak.
Exactly.
And I can only think like this is because he's having nightmares. They're not dreams, they're nightmares. He's reliving all of his trauma and garbage because he hasn't psychologically healed from any of it his entire life. And he's like, and all of that led me to death. Like literally, like he almost died in the Sarlacc pit, and that's going to make him reevaluate, what am I living for? What are these things? What is the value in what I'm doing in these locations, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Stranger in a Strange Land, which at the top of the episode we talked about has this, meaning from Exodus. And specifically, it's when Moses has his son, he names him Gershom, which literally means kind of stranger, because he has become a stranger in a strange land. And that's from the King James Bible translation. Sometimes it's translated as foreigner in a foreign land. And what's really interesting about this period of time when Moses says this is that he's like on a break from all of fate and God's responsibility. And it literally takes God speaking to him. God came down and made a bush explode in flame and told him, get your ass back to Egypt. I need you to go and save the Israelites. at the time, he was like, no, I'm just living my life. I'm just going to set up myself. I'm just going to heal. I'm just going to have my son. I'm going to have my wife. I'm going to build a family here. I'm going to shepherd these sheep, right? Doesn't that feel like what Boba is doing? Trying to control this like backwater planet that doesn't mean anything to anybody?
Yeah, that's interesting. Like Tatooine is this sort of harsh, chaotic world that's sort of the antithesis of like the Force and like in Camino and like I don't know. It's very much the dark side of the spectrum, and
like there's no life there or hardly any, but yet life survives, and yeah.
And in Exodus, we would be dealing with like the God who's more sort of like wrathful and unknowable, right? I mean, rather than sort of the Jesus conception of God, it would be more the, if you open the ark, your face melts off.
Well, he's the one who did send the plagues of Egypt, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think there's a couple of really interesting parallels to the Moses story in general. So, Boba himself has been working for the Empire. He is basically like Moses, who was working for the for Egypt. He was a son of Egypt. He was a prince of Egypt. He was adopted into this society. And when he was adopted, actually, to save his life from the Pharaoh, who was concerned about the growing population of the Israelites, he had all of the newborn sons of Israel killed. And it's like, it's so interesting because like that's what kind of happens to Camino. All of the newborn like clones are killed. Like they destroy like the potential chance for any more newborn clones. Additionally, we acknowledge now that Boba Fett is a Mandalorian because of what we've learned in Mandalorian Season 2. The Empire has also destroyed the homeworld of the Mandalorians and spread its people across the galaxy. And so there's a lot of parallels in that too. Like he also comes from this other population that doesn't have a home and is, it hasn't been treated well, but yet he still chooses to work for this like evil empire in both cases. Like so Moses and Boba. And where Stranger in a Strange Land, that line specifically comes from, is in this point where he has yet to figure out who he truly is. He hasn't accepted who he is as a leader of his people in both cases. So like to me, this is what they're telling us. They're telling us that this is this point by which our hero, Boba Fett, is experiencing a transformation through his experiences, but he's kind of in this weird like purgatory or waiting period while he's figuring out who he is and what everything means to him and what his purpose is. And I just think that's really awesome.
Yeah. Reading up on Moses, like the general summary of Exodus and looking at some of the lyrics and whatnot, two things occurred to me. I thought of the Darksaber, as kind of like, so you have I guess an idol that symbolizes the authority of God, similar to the Ark and Moses as sort of the messenger of God.
Of the Ten Commandments, yeah.
And Mandalore, I guess, would be kind of like this, pretty important mantle in Mandalorian society. And then also, I think Moses didn't know he was not Egyptian in his youth, right?
No,
like
he
grew
didn't.
Up,
no.
Right. And so, which is a nice parallel with the fact that like, the clones don't know that the Republic is really the nascent, empire, like under the control of the Sith, like that kind of, they don't know that they're kind of captive or right. Like they think they're just born to do this job that they're doing, right?
Yeah. And they don't actually know that there's another option for them. nor does it feel like there's another option. Like, and this just makes me feel like, are we heading towards a stormtrooper rebellion of some sort? That would be so cool from a reconciliation perspective, from a understanding of like, the stormtroopers are the sort of children from a generational trauma perspective of the clones, and like they came about from that. I've always wanted a stormtrooper rebellion, and so is it time? I don't know. Either way, Boba needs reconciliation with him and who he truthfully is, right? So bringing back all of the pieces of himself together so that he can truly be a whole person. That's the point. So
also,
cool.
War is perpetuated through this notion of us and them. We are enemies. We are not cut from the same cloth. It's very interesting that in that Sarlacc pit is a stormtrooper, and that in a womb sort of sense, like if that's like symbolic of like him crawling his way out of the womb, it would be like that's my brother, right? That
that's my twin brother.
Yeah,
in a way. And the stormtroopers are also like him. He is not unlike them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very rich stuff.
Very rich stuff. I do also want to point out, like, as far as the Heinlein connection, from Stranger in a Strange Land, Smith, who's the main character, he was raised on Mars and then comes back to Earth and is sort of treated differently, and doesn't have words to describe sort of relationships and things like that. And so water ends up being this sort of bonding experience. If they share water together, they're bonded and they're sort of like above being family. Like they're more important than being family. They're kind of like married in a way, like spiritually. But you can do that with anybody essentially. And it's an interesting thing that they also put a fair amount of importance on water in this. And I felt more that it was more pulling on Dune parallels, but the Heinlein connection certainly is there. It's just the Heinlein story itself is nothing like this one. So I tend to lean towards more the Moses and, Savior who's in the denial of the call phase of himself, where he's kind of stuck in this spiritual desert, literally and figuratively, until he figures out exactly who he is and what he wants and how he's going to go about doing it.
Yeah. I think both the Heinlein novel and Dune probably come from like that whole counterculture movement too, that George Lucas was like clearly kind of maybe not a product of, maybe not part of, but like him and Scorsese and Spielberg and all those guys, like they were more like they were not hippies, but they were kind of hippies, right? I mean, I think Star Wars kind of comes from that sort of, basically anti-Vietnam culture. And so I think there's a connection there to the Stranger in a Strange Land novel, just this idea of, maybe these hippies have a point, what are they really talking about? What is George Harrison doing this meditation and LSD for? Like, what are they trying to get at? And
make love, not war.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is fun because, I guess the sort of thought experiment that fans, have played with forever is kind of like, what if, what's the goal of Star Wars? To get the war out of it, and then what are you left with? I think that's a fun thing to wrestle with.
What is the war without the stars, or star without the wars? Is that what we're asking?
I guess
I do find it interesting that they have changed the intro, so it's always those helmets, right? The helmets and the droids and the heads, and we get Fennec and we get Boba, before the end. And they kind of change up the helmet depending on the property that is being shown. And then we get the Star Wars symbol, and it's almost like the label but it's not the brand any longer, which I appreciate. So now they've gone with this very biblical title of the Book of Boba Fett. Like it's like the Book of Exodus. And that's why I'm like, oh, okay. They're playing on, much like Jesus, Moses was a savior of the Old Testament, you know, and this is Boba Fett. He is actually a hero, but he's kind of stuck in this place of change so far. So why tell a story except for to show transformation and change of the character through their experiences?
Yeah. Yeah, I watched like the first act of The Force Awakens like a week or two ago, like while I was eating dinner. And I was struck by how much they emphasized like Finn's mask and then Rey's mask when she first shows up and Kylo's. And it occurred to me with this show coming up, the Boba is really like an early part of that whole mask tradition in Star Wars, like that literal, we don't see Boba's face until 2002 in Attack of the Clones, right? So
yeah,
I thought that was kind of
even holds out longer than Vader, right?
Yeah, yep, a lot longer, and it really bothers people, right? The New York Times is like, "What the hell, man? We don't want to see his face, right?
We don't want to see this man's face. We just wanted our gritty Western, with Boba Fett in space. Come on."
You want me to feel things from art?
Wait a second. And that's what I found so interesting. Like the description for the Disney Plus series is like this gritty Western around Boba Fett. And I'm like, that's not the show I watched. Disney Plus. I watched a man trying to avoid getting melanoma while dealing with like the existential dread of A, getting older, and B, the meaningless of just pure destruction, while having witty banter with his, colleague with benefits. That's what I saw. But I don't know. New York Times, I guess that's not good enough for you.
To be fair, I didn't read that article yet, but it's just funny that people are offended at the thought of the mask coming off, You see that in Halo too. They don't want to see Master Chief's face.
I trace this all back to Samus.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
men being disappointed with the character when their helmet came off. Maybe they also didn't like Vader. I don't know. There's a lot of themes of what is hidden beneath the surface can bring you life or death, and is also not what you're expecting. There's a lot of that going on. So not just Boba, digging in the desert, but going back to the kind of more modern storyline where, he's presented with one set of information, and even the major domo is like, I can see how that you would have read it that way, but this is actually what's going on. So it's everywhere in this story. And you were saying that it's a lot like how Rodriguez tells stories anyways.
Yeah. So in Desperado, I remember being a kid and my dad was watching Desperado on TV, and you see all these guys carrying guitar cases, because they're mariachis, but, it's not a guitar in there. It's a bazooka. It's an AK-47 or an M16, and so it's just a fun little gag that like, these guys are not what they appear to be. Similarly, you can watch the first like hour and 15 minutes or so of From Dusk Till Dawn, and you think that these guys are just like a couple of crooks hanging out at a, basically like a strip club on the edge of the Mexican border. But it turns out it's actually like built atop like an ancient Aztec pyramid, and inside everyone is like a vampire goddess, like these are all a bunch of, and it flips like a switch. Like suddenly everybody just transforms, and like, what you thought was like Salma Hayek just doing an erotic dance or whatever is like, no, she's about to kill everybody in the room. That's a very like Rodriguez kind of signature move, I think, to just kind of pull the rug out from under you. I think with this monster, he's also like buddies with people like Tom Savini and Greg Nicotero are in the movie. The guy who put together From Dusk Till Dawn as a project, like is a guy, with a background in makeup and monster effects and things like that. And so to have the big Ray Harryhausen monster come out of the sand, it's just, I don't know. It feels like Robert Rodriguez getting to play in the Star Wars sandbox.
Giving him like more license and ownership over Star Wars feels good too, because it gives us kind of like a different lens. Like we would have never gotten a mariachi version of the Cantina theme, which I'm in love with.
Yeah, I absolutely loved that. And it's like this weird fusion of the familiar and the new and Rodriguez.
Yeah, it's surreal in some ways. Like what we know is not what we know. And we got that feeling in the first season of The Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then the second season had so many sort of disappointing, I would say, sellout moments. And so like I'm hesitant to be excited about the symbolism, even though it's there. And like this metatextual conversation that is happening around the character of Boba Fett that is enhancing the character tenfold for me. Yeah. I'm hesitant.
Yeah. The weird thing about myth and mythology and all this stuff is like, this is just kind of stuff that exists in the air. And when you're just creating a story, it shows up whether you intend it to or not. So yeah, it does make you nervous. Like we're seeing all this stuff. It is there, but yeah, are they going to take it to a satisfying climax conclusion? Yeah. That is the question. Yeah.
Yeah. And it resonates correctly with our brains. And John knows the hero's journey. He's read Campbell. He can be a thoughtful storyteller who feels the inevitable conclusions of things and understands sort of the impact of them. And yet also we've seen them do things that have been kind of odd and out of place. And so far the first episode has really impressed me. Although I can certainly see how people would have some genuine criticism about it, either not satisfying their needs or not exactly what they were expecting or not having kind of a hook. I would say, I think that's what's missing in this first episode for many people is like the Baby Yoda thing in the end of the first episode of The Mandalorian, like the hook that says like, oh, this is what this is all about. Or this is this thing. This is this through line that we're going to hang these shingles onto to build our house for Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah.
I don't know that we've gotten that yet. Yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of like not explicit yet. And it feels kind of like portions of The Last Jedi or some of the better parts of Rebels where you're just kind of like scratching your head, like, where are we going with this? And, yeah, it could be somewhere really exciting.
It could. And the fact that they're already laying all of this psychological groundwork makes me super excited and happy because that's the sort of things I like to chew on. I like to chew on the meaning and the why and the how of how they're telling this story to show and to humanize even more a character I couldn't have cared less about. Now I care. Hey, you had me sitting up and being like, I care about Boba Fett. Congratulations.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the surprising thing about Mando season 2 was like, oh shit, I'm a Boba Fett fan now. Didn't see that coming. And I guess my criticism for this first episode would just be that like, it's sort of all the obvious things that you would expect to see in a Boba Fett series.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that like, okay, we have gotten the obvious obligatory stuff out of the way and we can now move on to, crazy, world between worlds and all the cool transcendent fantasy and myth stuff that we hope to see again. But, it's hard to say. I do think Favreau is a really talented guy to have guiding stuff. But he's also probably somebody who values what the fans want and thinks like a fan. And so there's a danger in that. It's, you hope that he can thread the needle and kind of trust his inner voice rather than, his, there's the part of me that loves seeing like the action figure that I played with when I was 7. But do I want just that? No, I don't want only that. I want yes and, and weird mystical stuff, you know?
Yeah. Well, and also just deep psychological storytelling through making it mythic. And you will get the action figure still, and you'll actually feel more connected to it if it tells the story on a sort of a psychologically resonant level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We haven't really mentioned
my
this,
largest criticism is that Star Wars is no longer for the little kids, or for the preteen kids, or the kids that are about to enter teenage years. However, I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing when we look at the ages of, Temu Morrison and Jennifer Beals and Ming-Na Wan. Like, we're dealing with people who are 61, 58, 58. Like, they're well established and they're all gorgeous still. Like, can I look like any of them when I'm in my 60s, please, or later 50s? Like, oh my gosh. And just to tell a story where we have older characters and older actors playing them, especially by POC people who are contributing to the universe and saying, hey, you know what? We can also have adventures. We can also have flirty times as well. That's also enjoyable too.
Yeah. It's the leads are people of color, and then you've got just things like the term daimyo being used was kind of nice. It's like an acknowledgement of kind of the way Ryan did a little bit in Last Jedi. It's like we're kind of acknowledging that Star Wars comes from Kurosawa, and that whole, it doesn't just come from the West. A lot of the, it comes from world mythology, world religion, and art as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Ryan using like more Rashomon direct parallels with how he told his story specifically. It was a very Kurosawa.
Yeah. So much of The Last Jedi felt like more kind of like a samurai film with just everything about like the framing of the shots, like Luke versus Kylo out on the salt flats. Like, that was a pretty different way to shoot like a quote unquote lightsaber duel. The thing it's most similar to would probably be Obi-Wan and Vader on the Death Star in the original,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So any final thoughts on what you want to see out of this season, or what you're hoping for based on what we've already seen? Any sort of speculation?
I mean, I liked that you kind of unearthed the Stormtrooper Rebellion idea. I hadn't quite gotten there, but I was really latched on to just the significance of this Stormtrooper being in the Sarlacc, because it could have been one of those, what is it, Weequay? Like one of those aliens that works for Jabba in Return of the Jedi. It could have been anything but a stormtrooper, but it's the Empire. It's Django and Boba's kind of,
and that's his
demons.
That's his skeleton in his psyche, right? That's the shadow self. That's his shadow self.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's cool. If they were going to bring back Mace Windu.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. That is kind of my even in Mando season 2, when they said Jedi, I was hoping it would be not Ahsoka but Mace, because Boba happened to be coming into the show. So
yeah,
I did want to see that moment of forgiveness, reconciliation. This idea that they're sort of the old guard. Kind of like the last Jedi type of thing, but for the Jedi Council who made so many mistakes and
I'm sorry I killed your dad.
Oh, right.
Just that. Just like literally, that's all Mace needs to say.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm in. How you doing? You grew up big. I'm old now. Sorry I killed your dad.
Yeah. Throughout all the expanded universe Legends stuff, throughout Clone Wars, throughout Rebels, they've constantly alluded to this ancient war between Jedi and Mandalorians.
Ah, yes.
Right. And we kind of don't know the details except for, the dark saber, the lore around the dark saber, and some sort of vague stuff. So
we sort of knew like a little bit more from like Old Republic and Knights of the Old Republic, and like that.
Sure.
How Knights of the Old Republic like starts at the end of the Jedi Mandalorian War. But I've always wanted there to be more explored. I also think, personally, I think that this is leading us to, he has a plan to sort of utilize this crime syndicate to get something or take control of something that will lead him to helping out the Mandalorians. Like, this is all leading towards like Mandalorian season 3, right? Or, the eventual rescue of Mandalore again, or, saving the Mandalorians in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I get the sense that they brought Favreau into the Star Wars fold so they could do the Avengers thing, right? Where they bring all these series into one, where the retaking of Mandalore, kind of like completing George's vision to the extent that they can. And also like Filoni has always been kind of the guy who navigates, like, he comes from the world of like the expanded universe, and he kind of knows all that stuff that's now like non-canon, but so he sort of helps bring it in
when it's appropriate.
Yeah, Thrawn, right, and all that.
Not killing Chewie with a planet.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And you know what? I think what we'll get is some sort of resolution with where Boba Fett feels like he is and what he wants by the end of the season. I'm just interested in like specifically the relationship with him and Fennec. I want them to explore that quite deeply. I also am all here for Boba healing his trauma in his bubble bath of his back to bubble bath tank.
Yeah.
I mean, if all we get out of this show is that men feel the desire to go and have a bubble bath to like unwind from all of their emotions and their things that they've experienced, they've done their job.
I also like the explanation given for like Fennec. It's just like he saved her life, and so now I must serve him for all the rest of my days. Like, that's a fine hand wavy explanation for like Mando season 2 when they both show up and you just kind of want to get to the point with Grogu and whatnot. But like, yeah, she's got her own interior life that we're kind of not seeing as of this episode. There's more going on with her than meets the eye. And so, what is her past other than the Bad Batch, which is fine. I like the Bad Batch quite a lot.
Yeah, she was an assassin in that, which is fine.
Yeah, it was just kind of that was sort of her surface level Boba and Empire Strikes Back type of thing where, she's just being a badass. But yeah, what is her hopes and dreams?
If there's a pull from like the Remington Steele inspiration, which they did reference, what originally happens is that she sets up a private eye agency and is not successful on her own until she says that there's an owner, this mysterious Remington Steele, who and then she finds that her business, she's like, I work for my boss at Remington Steele. And then this master thief shows up and assumes the role of Remington Steele, and then they end up becoming private eyes together. That's the story, is that she's kind of actually the brains behind the operation in so many ways. And then they have this like deep, like fighty, yet also like chemistry, like chemistry, even though it was kind of all under this lie, that she created. Yeah. I'm imagining sort of a Casino Royale scenario where maybe she betrays him and then he's like, but I love you, blah, blah, blah. And then, I would love some sort of thing where she's like, screw that guy. And he's like, but things were so good or whatever. And then, they work it out. No. I want them to be in a relationship. I feel like that would be growth for Star Wars on so many levels, and also show us an older kick-ass couple who take names together.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a good dynamic where people have been poking fun of it a lot on Twitter, just sort of like her tendency, like, do you want me to stab this guy? And him
and
like,
he's like, no.
Yeah. It's like when you go out to a restaurant with your date and like one person's like, oh, this like steak isn't cooked right, I'm gonna like complain to the waiter. You're like, no. It's kind of like that.
Just eat your steak, it's fine. Like, yeah, I don't want to cause a scene. Yeah, she definitely seems like the angry one. And I'm really excited to see their dynamic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Alex, I think we've covered the show pretty well up to this point. So where can people find you if they're looking for you and anything you do online?
You can find me recapping each episode on usatoday.com and on Twitter, goofing off at Alex J. Kane, Kane.
Thanks again for joining, and we will see you back next week for another episode covering Book of Boba Fett. Cheers. Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force. Brad, Melody, Night Huntress in Wild Space, Felicia, How Rude, Anna Perez, Macau Mom, Neil, James, Joe Allen D, Christian Luca, Josh Johnson, Scott C, and Susan. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other pod apps. It helps people find the show. Check out our other channel on YouTube or other podcast feeds, What the Fiction. You can connect with us on Twitter at WT Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or our website, whattheforce.ca, or on our Discord. Links are in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.